Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Salam Islamic Center weekly webinar series. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on contemporary issues by part 2 by Dr.Alp Aslandogan, Executive Director of Alliance for Shared Values. Dr. Aslandogan was our guest a couple of weeks ago. Now he's going to continue his conversation this week on this topic. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Aslandogan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'd like to again wish a very bountiful, blessed Ramadan to all our viewers and a blessed Eid, which is in a few days. So let me share my screen so that we can see some visuals about our topic. I think last time we stopped at the topic of principled pluralism, so I'd like to pick up from there. Prior to that topic, we talked about the concepts of peace and war in the Prophet's life, how he preferred peace all the time, how he did everything possible to avoid casualties, conflicts. We talked about Muslim-Jewish relations, how there are stereotypes that don't fit the historical facts. We talked about rooting out racism. We talked about environment, and we talked about women empowerment. Now we will talk about principled pluralism more, and also about freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Now, the most important aspect of the Treaty of Medina was that the constituents of the city of Medina were recognized as groups with equal rights, with a pledge to protect each other as a single political body against outside threats. So in that sense, it is very significant. Polytheist Arabs were participants in this treaty. Some scholars argue that this treaty is only applicable for a limited time period, and after the events that follow this treaty, it is no longer applicable. In other words, it cannot be taken as an example of how Muslims can live in peace and harmony with non-Muslims. But this is one opinion. There are also other opinions which state that if the treaty was not broken by certain parties, maybe it would continue for a longer time. So we are not sure what would be the fate of the treaty if not for those betrayals. Another important agreement that the Prophet was a party to is known as the Khilf al-Fudul pledge. This is a pledge that was done by the Arabs prior to the Prophet receiving the message, peace be upon him, and this was in the pre-Islamic Arabian Peninsula. The issue of security, it was a challenge for people who did not belong to one of the strong tribes. The tribal protection, the tribal instincts, the tribal reflexes were very strong, and if somebody did not belong to one of those tribes, or if he was kind of cast out from that tribe, if he was an immigrant, refugee, or otherwise brought to Mecca through other means, then they essentially did not have any protection unless a member of those tribes extended protection to him or her. Now, a group of residents of Mecca prior to Islam, observing the plight of the weak, pledged to protect them, in a sense, bringing under their protection a group of weak, vulnerable people. And the Prophet ﷺ was a signator or party to this agreement. So after he received revelation, after Islam came to a point, the Muslim community came to a point of strength, the Prophet said, and this is in the Hadith books, the Prophet said that Islam did not take away from the pledges, from the principles of this pledge, which is about protecting the vulnerable in the city, And instead, Islam actually extended its pledge, its principles. So this represents another reference for Muslims for signing or being part of a social contract, essentially citizenship or other kinds of social contract where other parties are not Muslims. From here, I'd like to go into the topic of freedom of religion. And my primary source for this part, in addition to Dr. Reşit Haylamaz's research, also works by Dr. Ahmet Kurucan. One of his reference books I'm going to share with you shortly. So, in the literature, in the Western world, even in the Eastern world sometimes, there are claims that Islam is a one-way religion, that you can become a Muslim. There's no coercion into becoming a Muslim. But once you become a Muslim, you cannot leave. Otherwise, you have to be killed. Unfortunately, in history, many scholars gave opinions that agree with this stereotype or with this verdict. But there are also other scholars who have the opinion that there's no such punishment for leaving the faith alone. And the punishment, whenever that happened, was given, the capital punishment was given in events of treason. That is, when there were two parties at war, in hostility, and leaving Islam meant for real, not theoretically, but for real, for that person to join the opposing the enemy party, essentially constituting a treason in political terms. So the punishment, whenever that was applied, was only applied in such cases, not for leaving the faith. So a counterexample where a person who left the religion was not touched is shared here. This hadith is narrated in the famous book of Muslim, in the under topic Hajj. It says that a desert living Arabi person, Bedouin, pledged an allegiance to the Messenger of God. So that means he became Muslim. After staying for a while, he grew sick and stated that he would like to take his pledge back. So meaning that he would like to leave Islam and leave the community. The messenger did not give his consent to this, but the Arabi constantly repeated his demand. And regarding this event, the Messenger of Allah said, Medina is like a ventilator, it distinguishes the dirty from the clean. And he did nothing further, and he did not impose any sanction. So very clearly this person left Islam and the Islamic community pledge, but he did not join the enemy party, therefore he was not killed. Another incident is shared here, but I don't want to go into the details of this one for the sake of time, but we have at least two incidents when people left Islam but did not join the enemy party. They were not killed. The capital punishment was not applied to them. Indeed, there are very few cases in the early times of Islam, and in each of those cases, the party that was punished was actually joined the enemy side. Of course, freedom of religion the principles of freedom of religion is repeated many times in the Quran. In the second chapter, there is no compulsion in religion. This is a very famous verse. Verily, the true path has become distinct from the wrong path. And then in the third chapter, so if they dispute with you, Muhammad, but if they turn away, your duty is only to convey the message, and Allah is the seer of all his servants. And the author, Dr. Kurucan, reminds us that there are 12 other verses to the same effect. In a related similar verse, in chapter 5, verse 48, if Allah willed, he would have made you one nation. In chapter 10, and had your Lord willed, Allah willed, those on earth would have believed, all of them together. So will you, O Muhammad, then compel humankind until they become believers? So one other argument in this respect that there should not be capital punishment on faith matters alone. One other argument is that according to the Muslims themselves, according to the Islamic principles, a hypocrite is worse than a disbeliever, which means that if a person, despite living faith in his heart or her heart, if he is forced to appear, if he or she is forced to remain Muslim identity-wise or politically speaking, that means this person will turn into a hypocrite. Therefore, there is a fundamental conflict there. By forcing a person to remain Muslim, despite the fact that in their heart they left the faith, then you're turning that person from a disbeliever into a hypocrite. So this is another thought to consider when thinking about this matter of the freedom of religion. So the answer to the question is no, Islam is not a one-way religion. Practices in the history that are contrary to this should be regarded as political actions. And it should not be forgotten that during those times, political identity and the religious identity were not clearly separated as they are today. In today's world, we have countries that are secular democracies which allow for all kinds of religion. We have majority Muslim countries that allow for other religions. We have majority Christian or Buddhist or other countries which allow for the free practice of other faiths. There are exceptions, of course, but the norm in today's world is that political identity and the religious identity are not one and the same thing. Whereas in the history of Islam and other faiths, in a large portion of history, states were aligned with a particular faith, and therefore the two identities were almost merged. So the verdicts and the actions of the former majority Muslim nations or political authorities should be taken in that context. One final example I want to share about this topic is the policy of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, the first caliph, after the passing away of the Prophet. So when the Prophet passed away, there was some level of chaos, some level of uncertainty in the Arabian Peninsula, and some of the clans, tribes who embraced Islam recently, they made certain claims, and there were attempts at leaving the union of the tribes and the clans who embraced Islam. So one of these groups actually declared that while they will continue to be Muslim, they will refuse to pay the taxes to the central political authority. And against this, Abu Bakr sent an armed unit to address this situation, to address this it is one form of rebellion, if you want to call it that way. So the people whom this armed unit was sent to, military unit was sent to, they were Muslims by identity. They accepted Islam, they accepted the Prophet, peace upon him, they accepted Quran, they even prayed, but they refused to pay the zakat tax. But if they continued to insist on that, they would face a clash, an armed clash with the unit that Abu Bakr sent. So this is another example that the capital punishment that was applied in those times, however rare that was, should be regarded as a political action, not necessarily as a result of living one's faith. Well, I should also mention that in the Quran, there are threats against people who leave faith. But all those threats are concerning the hereafter. God does not promise or threaten anybody with any punishment in this world when they leave faith. All right. So I want to switch to our next topic, which is freedom of expression. Now, looking at the Muslim majority countries today around the world, one might get the impression that this concept is either unimportant, that nobody cares about it, nobody cares about, no Muslim cares about freedom of expression, or very few people care, most people don't care, or that there are no Islamic precedents or principles that support this concept, that support this essential freedom. Whereas in democracies around the world, freedom of expression is one of the essential tenets of democracy. So is it really the case that in Islamic history and Islamic sources there are no references, there are no precedents? So the examples that I'm going to share with you are from the book that I mentioned just a moment ago. In Turkish, it is entitled İslam'da Düşünce Özgürlüğü, Freedom of Thought in Islam by Dr. Ahmet Korucan. I believe its English version is not available yet. Maybe it is in the works. So I'm not able to point to an English edition, but I'm sure you will be able to find other sources that might have the same examples that I'm going to give. So one example of the free exercise of the freedom of expression is the case of Havla bint Salebe. Her case we saw under the topic of empowering women. And the situation was that there was this tradition in the Arabic Peninsula, pre-Islamic tradition, known as zihar. And a man would tell to his wife that you are like the back of my mother. So that would leave the women in limbo, not divorced, but not continuing regular, normal married life. She would be left in limbo if they had children with children. So it was a terrible situation for the woman. She could not marry somebody else, and she would not was not able to continue her regular, normal relationship with her husband and family. So this woman was subjected to this practice by her husband, and he came to the Prophet to ask, if this practice is abolished. And in the first asking, the practice was not explicitly abolished by God. There was no revelation about it. So the Prophet said no. And the women came again and talked to the Prophet, objected, why is it not abolished? For the second time, for the third time. And finally, a revelation came to address the woman's concern. But what is important for us in this context is the woman came to the Prophet multiple times, expressed his objection, his opinion, that this practice should be abolished by Islam, just like many other practices were abolished. And she was able to freely express herself, her opinion about revelation, about Islam, very fundamental, about the core of Islam, that Islam should abolish, God should abolish this practice, pre-Islamic practice. And finally, the revelation indeed abolished the practice. But from a freedom of expression point of view, I think this is very telling that all segments, all members of the society were able to approach the Prophet and express their opinions freely. Another example of the freedom of expression is in the case of the Battle of the Trench, Handak. As some of you might know, in the Battle of Handak, the Meccan Quraysh tribe polytheists came and surrounded the city of Medina. And in this slide, you can see kind of a graphic that I adapted from the internet. I should have put the resource. I'm sorry about that. So Medina is surrounded in part by the mountains, and then there are some opening areas. Those open areas, Muslims dug trenches to prevent the enemy armies from attacking the city of Medina. Now, one of these tribes that were joining hands with the Quraysh tribe in Mecca was the Banu Ghatafan tribe. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, wanted to break the alliance between multiple tribes, among multiple tribes. So he actually thought of proposing a ceasefire to this tribe, Banu Ghatafan tribe, promising them 1/3 of the produce of Medina. The date, maybe other, I don't remember exactly right now, but the produce of the Medina, he wanted to promise them 1/3 of the produce in exchange for them leaving the alliance. And then they refused. They wanted half of the produce, yearly produce. And think about this. This is a really big amount of the fruit of the work of the Medinans. And then they settled on 1/3. But then the Prophet consulted with his companions, in particular Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. When he was asked about his opinion, he first asked, "O Prophet, is this something that is revealed to you by God? Or is this something that you think is the best and you want us to follow that opinion?" And the Prophet said, "Well, this is my opinion. What is your opinion?" And Sa'd ibn Mu'adh said that, these people, these tribes, prior to this battle, unless they are our guest or they paid for it, they could not get a single date from us. So now that was the time when all of us were in ignorance. We were all mushrikun, the polytheists, ignorant people. We did not know God or the Prophet or the book. Now we are enlightened. We embraced Islam. Now that we should do this, let our 1/3 of our produce go to them without any payment, without any wrongdoing on our part. This is completely inappropriate. My opinion is that we continue to fight them or defend our city against them without any compromises, without promising them anything. And the Prophet actually adopted this opinion. He left his opinion and he adopted the opinion of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, possibly because he was one of the most important people in Medina. His opinion was very important, maybe for other reasons, but we see that he was able to express himself very clearly to the messenger of God, and he actually took his opinion and applied that opinion. Again, I think very telling, very important example of freedom of expression and a very democratic environment of discussion and deliberation. In another example, when some of the spoils of the war were being distributed, and I should explain the context here. In the Arabic tradition, when the tribes went to battle, sometimes, maybe oftentimes, I'm not an expert on that part, but they actually brought many valuables with them, so that in the event that their soldiers are disheartened, they want to go back, they want to retreat or leave the battlefield, they would know that all of the property that they brought would be taken by the other party. Sometimes they even brought their families to the battleground, so that the soldiers would, and this was nothing about Islam, this was a pre-Islamic tradition that was continued after Islam by the non-Muslim tribes. So therefore, at the end of the battle, whatever the other party brought to the battlefield in terms of the property was distributed to the people who participated in the battle. So one of the companions of the Prophet saw that in the distribution, it was not equal share to every person. The Prophet was pursuing many goals through this distribution of the spoils of the war, and he did not give equal share to everybody who participated. So this particular companion, Sa'd ibn Waqqas, he said, he questioned why it is not distributed equally. And he repeated this question 3 times. And then finally, Prophet said, "Oh Sa'd, sometimes there are people whom I love more dearly. I would leave them and give to others. The reason for this is that my worry about them, that they might be left in the hell for their over passion for wealth." So the Prophet was more concerned about people who value property so much that if they don't get wealth, that may actually shake their faith, shake their commitment, shake their pledge or allegiance. So he was concerned about that, and he also saw that some people were less worried about wealth. They did not care that much about spoils of war or any other wealth. So he was pursuing different goals, and this was, remember, this was early times of Islam. So although some people embraced Islam, their commitment was not deep in their hearts. It was very at a superficial level. So the Prophet was, in a sense, trying to keep them in the fold by using this mechanism. So what is important for us in this context, again, is that the Prophet tolerated this question, which was repeated 3 times. He did not get angry, and he answered this companion. So these are examples from the Prophet's life. Now, during the the caliphs, the rightly guided caliphs, the four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali, during their time, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, may God be pleased with them, we also see examples of the same concept. For instance, we see that Abu Bakr, in his khutbah, addressing the Muslim community, he is saying that if you see me not upright, you don't have to follow me. You should warn me. You should warn me to the wrong things that I might possibly do without knowing. But one particular case in the life of Umar is very striking. So in one Friday sermon, Umar was talking about the amounts of dowry. He was saying that because the women's party or women's family or women herself, because you are asking for so much, you are making marriage difficult, which leads young people to extramarital affairs. So therefore, don't ask for too much. Keep your request for dowry reasonable. Now, upon hearing this, an old woman who was at the mosque at the time, she said, "Oh, the Caliph of the Messenger of God, is this something that was delivered specially to you? Is this something that you received the Prophet directly, or is this an opinion?" And Umar said, "This is something that I concluded. I did not receive something directly from the Prophet." And the woman said, because I objected because in the Quran, there are verses that refer to the cases of divorce. And God says that if you divorce a woman and you have given loads of gold to a woman, then don't ask for that back. So which means that God is allowing women to have loads of gold as dowry. So are you meaning to limit something that God did not limit? So upon hearing this, Umar did not get angry. He did not say, "Oh, old woman, what do you know about religion?" He did not say any of that. He said that indeed this woman knows her religion better than Umar, better than me. So it was a very civilized, very mature response to the woman's objection. A very striking example of freedom of expression in Islamic community. So I think these are some pointers that will at least should lead us to explore more and not take the situation in the majority Muslim countries at the face value as true to the Islamic spirit. Now I want to move on to the topic of participatory governance. Sometimes we use the term democracy, but we might forget that democracy is much more than just voting or a parliament. Right? So what we really want in a true democracy is that people have a say in their governance, either directly or indirectly to representatives, and then there are other elements. So in this context, we notice that the Prophet, ﷺ, he did not appoint a successor or Khalifa himself. So he also knew that this would cause political problems later on. And the first Caliph was actually determined through a process which can be seen as the election by representatives. So the people who pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr, who was the first Caliph, who became first Caliph, those were, in a sense, the opinion leaders of the Medina community. And when they pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr, all the others pledged, and it was a consensus-building mechanism. It could go another way. Some other person might become. Actually, there was another candidate, as a matter of fact. And then we see that in the following Caliph determination processes, slightly different but similar, in a way different, in a way similar processes were followed. One other thing I want to mention in this context is that when we talk about democracy, it is not simply having a parliament and people voting for the representatives and the representatives making the laws and the executive branch, the head of the executive branch being elected. It is not just about that. Because without a proper checks and balances on the executive power and the lawmaking power, that is an independent judiciary, maybe a constitutional court or some kind of a mechanism to that effect, power being distributed among these elements. Having an independent and fair judiciary, freedom of expression that we just talked about, that certain unalienable rights, certain fundamental freedoms and rights. Without this whole package, it is not truly a democracy. So when we look at these base principles, base mechanisms, that we can see them, they are all Islamic principles. So maybe the apparent form of a parliament, we cannot say that particular form is Islamic per se, but the spirit of democracy, that is people's participation, checks and balances on sources of power, inalienable rights, freedoms and rights, an impartial judiciary. These are also elements of democracy, and we can certainly say these are elements of, these are Islamic principles or Islamic concepts. The form they are applied throughout history, of course, is a different story. Even in today's world, there are more democracies in the world than kingdoms, but to what degree they are true democracies can be debated. To what degree they actually fulfill the promise of democracy can be debated. But one other topic that I want to talk about in this night's talk is humor. And I want to talk about this because sometimes we forget the human dimension of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and we see them as almost like an unreachable, distant messenger. Whereas he was a human, he was appointed by God among humans to lead at least a part of humanity. And being human was very important in his leadership. If he were not human, then people could easily say, well, he is the prophet messenger, he is not like us, therefore we cannot behave like, we cannot live like him. Whereas he was a human, he suffered from the cold and the hot, he ate, and he also suffered hunger. So therefore his humanity is, I think, is very important. So it is important to understand his humanity in his interactions with his family, in his needs, how he fulfilled them, how he lived with his community. To understand his humanity is also very important. So one aspect of this humanity is his humor. So I'm going to give 3 examples. In one example, there was a companion of the Prophet that brought some herbs from the surrounding mountains and plateaus around Mecca. Mecca itself was not very fertile, so they relied on food being brought from outside of Mecca, and also herbs. So this companion was known for bringing herbs to the Prophet and also selling at the bazaar. So one day when he was selling his herbs on the bazaar, the Prophet approached him from behind and slowly, but amicably closed his eyes. And he announced to the bazaar, he said, "I have a servant for sale. Is anybody interested?" Of course, the companion realized that was the messenger. And then, of course, he probably felt the warmth of the Prophet. And he smilingly, he said, "Oh, messenger of God." He did not see himself as a handsome man or attractive man. So, "Oh, messenger of God," he said, "nobody is going to buy me. Nobody is going to be interested in me because I'm not very valuable." And the Prophet, in response, said, "You are very valuable in the sight of God. You are worth a lot in the sight of God." So it is both an instance of humor and also an instance of pedagogy, I think. In another instant, the Prophet, a group of people were about to go on an expedition and they needed steeds. And the Prophet asked one of his companions who had a fairly large body, he said, "Shall I put you on a baby camel?" And the companion said, "Oh, messenger of God, I am big. A baby camel will not carry me." And the Prophet then said, "Isn't every baby camel the baby of a mother? So even a grown-out camel still is the baby of his or her mother." And finally, as the final example, an old lady one day approached the Prophet and she said, "Oh, Messenger of God, can you tell me, will I be in paradise?" And the Prophet said initially, there will be no old women in paradise. And the woman was saddened. She turned around and left crying. Shortly thereafter, the Prophet sent another companion, told him to tell her that everybody will be young and flourishing in their best state in paradise. They will not be old. That's what he meant. Of course, the women's sadness will turn into happiness. And I'd like to now go into the topic of pedagogy. Again, the essential, the most important principle that emerges from the book and from the related research was that we should not see the Prophet's life as a single snapshot. Also, we should not read his life in one dimension only. Not only as a political leader, not only as the messenger of God, but he was also a teacher, he was a family member, he was a community member, he was a human. So if we neglect these other dimensions of his life, then we will be missing a lot. So one dimension that is very important is his pedagogy, that is how he thought, how he facilitated growth, transformation in people. And his actions, his examples are very important for us in that respect. So we see in the literature that depending on the circumstances, the Prophet employed many different methods of teaching people, transforming people. In one instance, the top instance here in my bullet points, the Prophet and a group of companions were traveling in the desert, and they stopped in a spot, and there was a group of youth that were playing. And when the Prophet and the companions began to call for prayer, one of the youth there noticed this, and apparently they were not believers, or maybe they were early believers, I don't remember exactly now. And this young person began to make a mockery of the prayer. So he was bending and deforming the words, or bending the tone, etc., to mock the prayer. The Prophet heard this and sent companions to bring those youth in his presence. Now, being caught by these awe-inspiring men, the youth were very afraid. And the Prophet said, "Who was the one among you who was making a mockery of the prayer?" Of course, everybody was very afraid. Nobody spoke, nobody answered. Then the Prophet began, "Okay, you, say the call to the prayer." So he was going to determine who did the mockery by hearing their voices. So one after another, now the order came to the youth who actually mocked the prayer. So the Prophet said, "Now you call the prayer." Later on, when this youth tells us the story, he said that at the moment when the Prophet told me, "Now do the prayer, make the call to the prayer," he was the worst person in the world for me, and what he asked me was the worst thing to ask me in the world. He reluctantly began to make the call to prayer, and the Prophet, instead of getting angry and punishing him, he began to actually correct the way to say the words. So he began to teach him how to properly make the call to prayer. So he slowly realized that there's no punishment. He is not angry. To the contrary, the Prophet actually discovered a talent that this youth essentially had a very beautiful voice. And then he was teaching him how to pray. So he realized that, he relaxed. And later on, when he is telling the story, he tells us that after I made the call and the Prophet taught me, I got emboldened. And I asked the Prophet, "Would you allow me to make the call to prayer in Mecca?" And the Prophet said, "Yes, you can go ahead and do it." So the youth says, "At that point, the Prophet was the most beloved person for me in the world. And what he allowed me to do or asked me to do was the most beloved thing in the world for me." And if you think about it, this event, this instance, took place in a matter of minutes. In a matter of minutes, a young person who hated the Prophet became a lover of the Prophet. and then in the process, a talent was discovered. So I think very, very important incident. In another incident related to this one, again, a child or a youth was throwing stones at a palm tree, and he was eating the palm dates that dropped as a result of that. The owner of the palm trees caught the boy and brought to the presence of the Prophet. Now, according to the Hadith tradition that tells us this story, the Prophet did a few things in order that we might not notice on a casual reading of the Hadith. These resources tell us that the Prophet first put his hand on the boy's head and slowly stroked his hair, and he said, "Oh, my child," in a very emphatic, endearing way. "Oh, my child, why are you doing this?" And the child responded, "Well, because I'm hungry." And then the Prophet said, "Next time you get hungry, don't throw stones at the tree. Just pick up the ones that are already on the floor, on the ground." So again, on a casual reading of this incident, we may not really understand much. I mean, okay, yeah, the Prophet was so compassionate. We may just go on with that impression. Indeed, he was very compassionate. But if you notice the actions that he took, first of all, he put his hand on his hair and then stroked. So in psychology, pedagogy now, the experts say that physical touch that is not abusive, that is not harassment. Physical touch actually has a positive effect in receptivity of the person, of the student. So as long as it is not harassment or abuse, different forms of physical contact actually helps being more receptive, therefore in learning and transformation. That is one thing. The second thing, the first word that the Prophet uttered to this person was, "Oh, my child." So it was an endearing term, giving the signal to the child that he is not about to punish him. He is on his side. He is trying to empathize, or he is empathizing with him. I mean, this reminds me of the grandmother jokes in English literature, where they say, your grandma cooks cookies for you. She gives you money. She has extra toys somewhere stored. If you eat an extra cookie, she will not tell your mother. She gives you extra money, and she is always on your side, right? So we see this kind of feeling on the boy's side. He felt that, oh, the Prophet is on my side. He's not about to punish me, but he's trying to understand me. And the third thing is the Prophet first said, "Why are you doing this?" Instead of just saying, "Don't do this anymore," he tried to understand. He actually asked to understand why the boy is doing this. Because according to the modern psychology, harmful habits, happen in a context of a stimulus, a need, a partial fulfillment of the need, and then the cycle continues. That is, a person has a certain need, there's a stimulus that triggers an action, and this action satisfies the need either truly or in an artificial way, superficial way, and then this makes a feedback loop that makes this person continue this habit. So in order to break the habit, you need to either remove the stimulus or satisfy the need in another way. So what the Prophet did in this case, when he said, next time don't throw stones, but just pick up the ones on the ground, the Prophet was actually changing the behavior. That is the harmful behavior of stoning the tree, but replacing with a behavior which is harmless. The dates already dropped, so nobody's going to complain about them, the boy picking them, and then it's going to satisfy the hunger of the boy. So the need will be satisfied in a way that is not harmful to the child. So, certain principles or observations that the modern psychology reached in the 20th or century or so, in the incident with the Prophet, we see this already in action. In the final example that I want to give, and I'm going to pause with that, we see that one of the early Muslims from a tribe outside of Medina, when he came into the mosque, he actually urinated in the mosque. Probably that might have been okay in the standards of their community, in the 7th century Arabia. Of course, for Muslims, it is their kind of sacred, if not sacred, it is their clean ground where they pray. So urinating is definitely a no-no in the mosque. So some companions actually stood up, and they were almost going to punish him by beating him. And the Prophet stopped them. He said, leave my community alone with me. And he explained that this is a place where we pray. It is inappropriate to urinate here. You should do that in a proper place outside. And then the matter was resolved. Again, we see the Prophet relating to the mindset of the person who takes a certain action. I think the biggest lesson from all of these cases is that the Prophet is most primarily concerned about what kind of mindset led to this action. Rather than punishing or stopping the action first, he is relating to the mindset that produced the action, and he is addressing the mindset. He is healing the mindset. He is transforming the mindset, which by itself leads to another action. So, Attila, I can stop here and allow for questions if there are questions, or I can go on for more.
Thank you for being with us at this day. I know you've broken your fast, and it's like critical time of the day. So the thing is, this is our last webinar in Ramadan.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to have a recess next week because of the festivities. So we're going to take a pause with that. So I think it's best to conclude here. Okay. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Aslandogan.
Thank you for the opportunity. It is very dear to my heart. I value this opportunity a lot. So I wish all of our viewers happy Eid, happy Bayram, and happy, blessed remaining days of the Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you for the well wishes. Wish you the same, and your family and friends back in the East Coast. So
thank you.
Thanks for being with us, to our dear audience at the Salam Islamic Center's webinar series. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Have a blessed Ramadan and Eid. Thank you.